Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at an aggro dragon deck. At least that's what I've got it listed as I can't really think of calling it anything else. I mean, majority of the cards are 3 or below with a couple of 4 drops, a couple of 5 drops, and just a few higher than that with 3 6 drops being the Riders and 1 Eyes Drakaha, which you're normally not playing for 10 anyway due to how evolves function. Otherwise everything else is very aggressive. Running a lot of small drops means you could have something like PDK in this deck, although I probably wouldn't recommend it. It does seem to focus a lot more on its storm effects, especially with things like Hippogriff Rider, which actually does surprisingly well. So we're going to get right into this and check it out. Okay, so first game is against Shadow. As I have mentioned in other videos, Shadow is one of the weaker classes in rotation, with only really Reanimate being a kind of viable deck, with most other things kind of just lacking the removal and small followers that it needs to really finish games. So I don't consider it a huge feat to beat Shadow, but this at least shows what this deck is capable of with its amount of aggression. Plus, sometimes Shadow can do extremely well. It just requires one decent high roll to really roll the game over. Because not to say Shadow is necessarily bad, it's just behind other decks at the moment in the current rotation format. Hoping we'll see some form of change at some point where at least Shadow gets given another chance, although I don't want to see it topping. I'd rather see it sitting kind of middle ground, similar to where some other decks sit. So we start off with a very aggressive hand, lots of followers, lots of things to use, but not so much that I really want right now. I mean, the best thing I've got is probably Alia, just because I can evolve that for an extra orb, which is great. And being able to just slam something else with it should be okay. Although this board isn't the best. So we're going to get to kill at least 2 to 3 things here, pretty comfortably. If I had have thought about this turn a little more, I might have planned it out a bit better and probably traded even better, but I mean, only clearing a couple of things, not really the best way to go about it. If I had ran that 1-2 into the 1-1, maybe even just thrown the 4-3 into something, might have been a better move. Especially since risked leaving up that 1-2. Although it does mean that they didn't summon much other than Bones here, which I'm not too concerned with. Especially since they forced that Evo out for that trade. So we do get another turn if we want to just ramp it out, which is actually okay, but there's a few other ways we can go about this, just kind of curving our board as best we can and removing as much as possible. So really there was a nice amount of ways to go about that. Even though I could have ramped, this deck doesn't require ramp as hard as some other decks. It's just kind of a nice addition. So the Eternity Hunter does get the play. We haven't really seen anything thrown from the deck yet, which is why this card doesn't worry me too much. Even with this trade, not a real major issue. But Elia, with another Evo, could be okay, especially since I'm only going to use my Evo trade anyway.
Time to say goodbye.
So being able to hit the 6-4 and remove it is fairly decent. I've also got the 1-2 still, which is a good draw source. From here, I really just need to stick as much as I can to this board and go face for as much damage as possible each turn now. It was definitely a slower match just because I focused on removing Shadow's smaller followers, because I know if Shadow can build a small board, they can quite easily fill us up with just absolute terrifying things, so why not go that way? So we go for the Hippogriff Rider plus the Dragoon Scyther. Dragoon Scyther will boost the Hippogriff Rider by at least 1, which is always a nice thing to give that extra bit of damage. Always good to remember that Hippogriff Rider should be the last thing on your board to attack, unless you have 2 of them, in which case they will be the last 2 things to attack. Mist of Extinction, probably the best AoE Shadow has at the moment, at least in regards to removing 4 health followers.
I am a Dragon Slayer.
Heroic Dragon Slayer. I actually really like this card, although I always struggle to think of something to use it on until the late game when I decide where I'm best spending my resources. In this situation, I thought that was the best because Hippogriff Rider plus Dragon's Handspur is lethal, so really as long as they didn't play a ward, I was going to be okay. Although healing would have been pretty dangerous too. And Gloom Tombs, you don't get to see those sort of cards go off this way, especially with this. Luckily they did concede, but I mean, it was a super interesting match to see that card played. And now we have the Nightmare Witch of Dragoncraft. Really a awkward class, I guess, to verse normally. You never know what to expect out of them. Most commonly it seems to be Ginger. That's the most popular thing to come out of Rune, at least in the rotation format. Rune just always seems to have one singular deck or two singular decks sort of things that work well, so having two of the same sort of decks with D-Shift of Daria but run on very similar spell boost engines. I mean, we had Earth Rune, which was absolutely dominating for a while. Then we've also got Ginger Rune now that is extremely powerful, although very draw reliant. So it's really interesting that Rune never seems to have necessarily a completely dead time. There's never a time when Rune doesn't have some kind of deck that can either counter a meta or work in a meta, unlike some other classes that just struggle. Even with their semi-decent decks, can struggle in a meta. So a nice trade. To make a small error going this turn, really should have just thrown the Force out, cleared out both of these and went face instead of trading. Although the trade isn't the worst possible option, getting a draw is still reasonable. I definitely feel like it wasn't the strongest play. So Summon Drills, another card that's not really an issue to me now. And I mean, now our Force has at least some value, I guess, depending on how we use it. There's so many options that we can go down. Of course, Heroic Dragon Slayer with so many cards in our hand isn't too bad. I just needed to pick one that I could transform, so I did transform our other one just so I could get the 4-drop spell out of it now before I go later. And forcing them to have to pick a trade here is going to be good for me. Having to lose their 2-1 to one of these is going to at least feel decent on my board. Even the Revolve isn't going to be perfect.
How can you expect forgiveness?
Although the Banish is pretty good.
Was that really all I had?
But using an AoE spell like that to remove one follower, that's definitely not a nice way to go about it. Especially when they could have cleared both of those without having to even use that evolve point there. And plus, they didn't even bother to attack, which I found very odd. At least I didn't see them attack.
It won't be long now.
So I think that whole turn for them was just one kind of mess up. It was a very odd turn.
And back I go.
So we get our trade, we get a couple of things onto the board, which is good. We have our Eyes Drahaka, which means we can go face with it. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I've got to remember that will summon a bunch of things. Summons so many followers. At least our Force removes 3 of those, so we really only had to deal with the 1. I do decide to set up as many of these Wise Mermaids as I can, just so I have stuff on board that can go face. Because being able to go face with this, or at least even attack with this, means Hippogriff Rider is going to get a huge boost next turn.
Back in the day, I was just a
So Hippogriff and Dragon Spur will actually open up a really nice strategy.
Still room for improvement.
Being able to remove this ward and at the same time go face 3 times with a nice boosted follower is going to be pretty decent. Now we've got another AoE, which should be pretty good. I didn't expect Force of the Dragonoot to actually be useful, but I actually found it a lot more useful than I expected it to be, being so low cost. Especially since a lot of classes run 1 health followers or can be dropped to 1 health very quickly. So my idea for this turn right now was just to kind of hold off a little bit. If I could have kept even just 2 damage, I had the chance to go for lethal here. Of course, I ended up with a lot more than that, so it wasn't really an issue, and with a couple of attacks, my Hippogriff Rider quite easily was going to be in lethal range, and with another one in hand, it really wasn't an issue. And so that about covers Aggro Dragon. Definitely not the strongest deck ever, but definitely has some potential, and only using 1 legendary and a handful of golds, I actually always like decks like that. I mean, we've got 9 golds in this deck, I believe, with the 3 sword, 3 newt, and 3 rider. That's pretty decent. Plus, pretty sure rider come in another variation. I might be wrong, can't remember. Either way, great deck. Have some fun with it. Definitely recommend it if you've got the cards. I mean, if you've already got 1 irons and you have a few golds, you should be pretty set, but It does well, it performs okay, and I haven't got to face mid-sword with it, but I don't see it doing too bad considering it's got a pretty decent health line to deal with a lot of mid-sword. So if you did enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe. As always, you'll find the deck list in the description below, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.